We're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome to our webinar today on updates on the Dyslexia Handbook. I'm so glad you all could join us today. My name is Stephanie McLaughlin. I am the Training and Evaluation Specialist for Partners Resource Network. Partners Resource Network is the nonprofit agency that operates the Texas statewide network of parent training and information centers. We are funded through the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs, and our projects throughout Texas are known as PACT, TEAM, and TEAM. At Partners Resource Network, we strive to empower and support Texas families and individuals impacted by disabilities or special healthcare needs. And also joining us today from Partners Resource Network is our Director of Statewide Services, Christina Henning, our support specialist, Chelsea Rivas, our technology specialist, Zach Hidalgo. And if you're having any technical difficulties today, please reach out to Zach in the chat box and he'll be able to assist you with those. And also be on the lookout in the chat box for information from Chelsea and any links and things from today's webinar. For those of you that are needing a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, you will be receiving an email to thank you for attending the webinar. If you'll follow the link in that email, you can get your certificate of attendance. We will have a brief time possibly at the end of today's webinar for some questions and answers, so please put your questions in the chat box and we're going to catch those and answer what we can of those today. A recording of the webinar today will be available on our website at prntexas.org in the coming days. And I want to welcome Gracie Whitley from SPEDTex. And Gracie, I'm going to ask you to share about your agency.
Hello, everyone. SPEDTex is a special education information center for Texas. We are a collaborative project between Region 10 Education Service Center and Texas Education Agency. SPEDTex provides information and resources that can help parents understand their child's disability, rights, and responsibilities under IDEA, as well as facilitate collaboration when there are concerns between the parent and the school district. We are a resource for parents as well as for educators, and we welcome any opportunity to provide assistance and support where needed. Our contact information is here on the screen, so please remember when you have questions about special education, please contact us at SPEDTex and we are happy to help.
Thank you, Gracie. So glad you could join us for this webinar today. All right, so we're going to get right to it, and I'm going to introduce our speakers and then turn it over to them. So our presenters today are from the Texas Education Agency. Deanna Clemens serves as a manager of the technical assistance team within the Department of Special Education at the Texas Education Agency. She is a nationally certified school psychologist, a licensed specialist in school psychology, and a board certified behavior analyst. Also joining us is Michelle Reeves. Michelle has worked in education for over 28 years. Michelle received her undergraduate degree in interdisciplinary studies from A&M Commerce and a master's of education from Southern Methodist University. She joined TEA in March of 2020. She currently serves as the director in the Department of Special Education on the technical assistance team as the state dyslexia coordinator. So thank you, ladies, for joining us, and we're going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having us. Let's see, I want to make sure I can share where we're at here. All right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen, and it is the full screen. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We've got
to put it in presenter mode. I think, Michelle, it's showing all your slides. There you go.
Oh, is it there now?
It's there now.
Okay, great, because that's what I was seeing, presenter mode. So thanks for the heads up. All right, like I said, thank you for having me today. We're so happy to be here and to share the handbook with you this morning. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started as we have quite a few slides to go through. So good afternoon. In today's webinar, we will be covering some of the key pieces of information for parents and guardians to know about changes to Dyslexia Handbook, the State Board of Education gave final approval for updates to the Dyslexia Handbook on September 3rd, 2021. Please note that as of the date of this webinar, November 18th, 2021, while the 2021 Dyslexia Handbook has been approved, it is not yet in effect or posted. The updated handbook goes into effect 20 days after filing as adopted with the Texas Register, which will occur in the coming weeks. This webinar is intended to go over some of the most important information and changes to the handbook for families. We want you to understand what the new handbook says so that you can better advocate for your child. Before we get into the 2021 Dyslexia Handbook updates, let's take a minute to review the handbook's history. The Dyslexia Handbook has gone through many changes over the years. The purpose of the Dyslexia Handbook is to provide procedures for school districts about early identification of, instruction for, and accommodations for students with dyslexia. The State Board of Education has authority over the Dyslexia Handbook. This handbook is used by school districts and charter schools as they develop their procedures regarding students with dyslexia. The handbook is part of the state law and includes requirements that schools must follow. The Dyslexia Handbook contains 5 chapters. These chapters are represented on the screen. Chapter 1 covers definitions and characteristics of dyslexia. Chapter 2 is about the screening process. Chapter 3 outlines the procedures for evaluation and identification of students with dyslexia. Chapter 4 covers the components of dyslexia instruction, and Chapter 5 covers dysgraphia, a disorder related to dyslexia. Today, I will not cover every single change or language update to the handbook in significant detail, but I will make sure to point out the main updates and important information for families within each of the 5 chapters. I want to start out with a visual that is not in the handbook, but it gives an overview of one of the major changes to the handbook and something that is really important for parents and guardians to understand. The 2018 Dyslexia Handbook outlined 2 separate entry points or pathways for dyslexia evaluation: evaluation through Section 504 or IDEA. The 2018 handbook asked school teams to make decisions about what type of services they believe students may need before conducting an evaluation. This proved to be very challenging and meant that schools may have missed identifying students who are eligible for special education. Often the conversations about which way the student would be evaluated did not include the parents, so families were unaware of the IDEA evaluation option that existed. Now the evaluation process starts at the same place with 1 entry point for dyslexia evaluation, a full and independent evaluation under IDEA. You might also hear this type of evaluation called a special education evaluation or a special education referral. The change to all evaluations, starting with seeking parental consent for an evaluation under IDEA, will help make sure that any student with dyslexia who needs special education services is identified. Now let's get into some specific information contained in each chapter. Chapter 1, Definitions and Characteristics. This chapter covers what dyslexia is and talks about the characteristics that identify risk factors associated with dyslexia from preschool to college. There were minimal significant changes made to this chapter, so for the most part, this chapter is the same as the 2018 Dyslexia Handbook. Please notice the new icon in the top right corner. If the information on the slide is new in the 2021 handbook, it will be indicated with the new icon as seen on the slide. In Chapter 1, a statement was added to reference evidence-based core reading instruction. School districts and open enrollment charter schools must use a system to teach reading that's based in phonics in kindergarten through 3rd grade. Make sure that all kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade teachers attend training created by the state on how to teach reading to younger students. certify to TEA that their best teachers are teaching in kindergarten, first and second grade whenever possible, certify to TEA that they have a system in place to monitor the progress of all students in learning to read in pre-kindergarten through third grade. The quote you see at the bottom, this handbook assumes that all students have received strong, systematic reading instruction in Tier 1, comes directly from the handbook. This section was added to really emphasize how critical it is that all students, especially those with or at risk for dyslexia and related disorders, receive quality reading instruction as part of their general daily classroom instruction. Tier 1 means the instruction provided to all students. No other significant changes were made in Chapter 1. The definitions and characteristics of dyslexia remain the same as in the 2018 handbook. The definition of dyslexia did not change from the 2018 handbook, but I wanted to show it to you for today's presentation. Dyslexia means a disorder of constitutional origin manifested by a difficulty in learning to read, write, or spell despite conventional instruction, adequate intelligence, and sociocultural opportunity. Another way to say that is dyslexia is a brain-based learning disability that makes learning to read, write, and or spell difficult despite adequate instruction and intelligence. The primary reading spelling characteristics are shown on the screen, also remain the same as in the 2018 handbook. The first characteristic is difficulty reading words in isolation. This means having difficulty reading individual words in a list or one at a time. The words are not part of a sentence or a paragraph. The second characteristic is difficulty accurately decoding unfamiliar words. This means not being able to apply the correct sounds with the letters in an unknown word, a word that has not been taught. Next is difficulty with oral reading. This is when students read slowly and are also unable to read some of the words correctly, but they are able to read with expression, are unable, to read with expression. The last primary characteristic of dyslexia is difficulty with spelling. Chapter 2, Screening. This chapter of the Dyslexia Handbook first appeared in the 2018 version. It covers the implementation of requirement for schools to screen all kindergarten and first grade students for dyslexia. The 2021 update has several important changes that we will cover in this next section. As stated earlier, evaluations for dyslexia will follow the process for evaluation under the IDEA. This is also called a special education evaluation. New text was added to Chapter 2 of the handbook that explains what child find is and how it connects to dyslexia. The text describes on the slides here. So state and federal law, IDEA requires school districts to find and evaluate students who have or are suspected of having a disability and needing special education services. This requirement is called child find. Dyslexia is a learning disability that may require special education services. As you see in the blue box, because a student suspected of having dyslexia may be a student sorry about that. This is a direct quote from Chapter 2. What this really means for schools is that now, when referring an evaluation for students suspected of having dyslexia, they must follow procedures for conducting a full individual evaluation under the IDEA. We will talk more about what this means and how it impacts families when we get into Chapter 3. As I mentioned earlier, Chapter 2 is all about the screening process and requirements that schools must follow. Here are the key takeaways regarding screening for you to know. Schools are required to screen all kindergarten and first grade students for dyslexia. This requirement has been in place since the 2018-2019 school year. A screening is a brief assessment of skills designed to quickly help schools identify students who may be at risk for dyslexia and may need additional help with their reading. School districts are required to screen kindergarten and grade 1 students for dyslexia. Kindergarten must be screened for dyslexia at the end of the school year. First grade students must be screened for dyslexia no later than January 31st. So if you are a parent or guardian to a kindergarten or first grade student, you should expect them to get a dyslexia screening this year. What is new in the 2021 handbook is the specific skills that must be part of the dyslexia screening. The number of skills in the 2021 handbook was reduced from the 2018 handbook. The chart from the Dyslexia Handbook shows what skills must be part of the screening in each grade. In kindergarten, schools are required to give a screener that looks at letter sound knowledge or letter naming fluency and phonological awareness. So in kindergarten, the students are asked to do things such as give the sounds that letters make, quickly name the letters of the alphabet, and manipulate individual sounds within words. In first grade, the screener has to include word reading accuracy or fluency and phonological awareness. Students are asked to read a list of words or read a timed paragraph and manipulate individual sounds within words. Chapter 2 of the handbook includes a flowchart that summarizes the requirements for administering a screening and what comes next. I'll cover the main points of this process in the next few slides. There was a flowchart in the 2018 handbook as well, but it has been updated in the 2021 version. Please notice the small figure 2.5 in the bottom left-hand corner. The highlighted area shows which section I am discussing on each slide. The section on this slide is the box at the top of this chart. This section reviews universal screening requirements. Again, all kindergarten and first grade students are required to be screened for dyslexia. At the bottom of the box, the first step in the screening process begins with the following question. Does the screener show the student may be at risk for reading difficulties? When answering the question from the previous slide, does the screener show the student may be at risk for reading difficulties? If the answer is no, the student should continue grade level, evidence-based, core reading instruction, tier 1. If the answer is yes, then the committee will collect and review more information and data on the student. Notice that the yes box references figures 2.3 and 2.4 in chapter 2. I will review these two figures in the next two slides. Figure 2.3 and 2.4 are unchanged from the 2018 Dyslexia Handbook. Figure 2.3 provides examples of student behaviors that may be observed during the screening administration. When the screening is administered, if any of these behaviors are observed, it would be documented by the individual who is administering the screening instrument. These are some behaviors that, if observed, will help the team better interpret the screening results. Figure 2.4 provides sources and examples for formal and informal data sources. So you have quantitative information that would be current screening instruments, previous screening instruments, formal, informal classroom reading instruments, additional brief and targeted skilled assessments. Qualitative information is observation of student during screening, other observations of student progress, teacher observations, parent guardian input, a family history, early language skills, current student work samples from earlier grades, and inventory history. All of this data is considered along with the screening results to help determine the next steps. Some students might do poorly on a single screener, but other data available indicates that the teachers and parents do not have concerns with the student's reading development. This step should happen fairly quickly, within a few weeks of the screener being administered, because it is intended to help the school have the data and information to know where to go next with the student. For example, continue regular instruction, begin intervention, or refer for an evaluation. If you know your child was given a screener, ask about the results. Remember, the whole point of a screener is to quickly identify who may need help and get them that help quickly. After reviewing all of the quantitative, formal, and qualitative, informal data on the student, then the team answers the question, does the analysis show that the student exhibits characteristics of dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities? Picking up on the flowchart from the question, does the analysis show that the student exhibits characteristics of dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities? If the answer is no, the student continues grade level, evidence-based, core reading instruction, tier 1, and is provided any other appropriate tiered intervention. If the answer is yes, then the next step is to seek parental consent for a full individual initial evaluation, FIIE. That means an evaluation under the IDEA. When you provide the school district consent or agree to the evaluation, then the evaluation is conducted typically within 45 school days. During the evaluation process, your child should be provided with grade level evidence-based core reading instruction and appropriate tiered interventions. Once the FIE is completed, the ARD committee will meet to review the results of the evaluation. The parent is included as part of the ARD committee. This is the end of figure 2.5. However, the process picks up with figure 3.8, which I will walk through in the next section. Some key takeaways from analysis show that the student exhibits characteristics of dyslexia or specific learning disability. If after reviewing the screening results and other relevant data, dyslexia or another specific learning disability is suspected, the parents are asked to give consent for a full individual initial FIE under IDEA. The evaluation must be conducted in 45 school days. With some exceptions, please note that 45 school days is the time frame for an evaluation under IDEA. It's not specific to dyslexia. During the evaluation process, your child should receive reading instruction in the classroom and be provided specific interventions in the area of reading where he or she is struggling. The path for evaluating for dyslexia is through IDEA or special education. Parents should not be asked to consent to an evaluation to identify dyslexia through Section 504. Under the handbook section titled Interpretation of Data, there is some added language that you see on this slide. The next text reminds schools that a referral for an evaluation can be made at any point in the process when looking at student screening data, and that parents always have the right to request an evaluation at any time. The next text also reminds us that the purpose of screening is to help identify as early as possible the students at risk for dyslexia or other reading difficulties so that targeted intervention can be provided. When students are not responsive to good instruction and intervention, the school must refer for an evaluation, and that referral is for an evaluation under IDEA. Chapter 3, Procedures for Evaluation and Identification of Students with Dyslexia. This chapter of the handbook has significant changes. In the next couple of slides, I will cover the updated figure 3.8 pathway to the identification and provisions of instruction to students with dyslexia. There was a flowchart in the 2018 handbook, but this one is significantly different. Please notice the small figure 3.8 on the left side of the slide. The highlighted area shows which section I'm discussing on each slide. Box A and box B should look familiar. They are both on the flowchart we talked about with screening. What is new here is the box in the upper right. Universal screening information is one way to identify students that are at risk. But as we know, in all grades, for a variety of reasons, a student may be suspected at any time of having dyslexia or another specific learning disability. That is represented by the box on the top right. If your child is not suspected of having dyslexia or another specific learning disability, then your child would continue with core instruction, shown here, with the no box. If the answer to the questions regarding risk or suspicion of a disability are yes, then you move to the box in the lower right labeled B. Here, similar to the screening flowchart we looked at in the last section, the team is collecting and reviewing additional data to help answer the question. Does the analysis of data show that the student exhibits characteristics of dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities? Starting at the top of the slide, does the analysis show that the student exhibits characteristics of dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities? If the team reviewing and analyzing that data answers no, the student continues grade level, evidence-based core reading instruction, Tier 1, and the district provides any other appropriate tiered interventions. If the answer is yes, box C, then the next step is to seek parental consent and conduct a full individual initial evaluation, FIE. The next question is, does the parent give consent for an FIE? When a school district seeks parental consent to conduct the FIE, it must be informed consent and include proper prior written notice and be accompanied by the notice of procedural safeguards. Parents and guardians must be informed of the procedural protections and rights afforded to you and your child under the IDEA. You've seen this slide before. The difference here is that we are talking about referrals that are made for any reason at any grade level, not just those stemming from the screening in kindergarten and first grade. But the key takeaways are the same. Whenever the available data suggests dyslexia or another specific learning disability, parents are asked to consent to conducting an evaluation under IDEA. The evaluation must be conducted in 45 school days, with some exceptions. During the evaluation process, your child should receive reading instruction in the classroom and be provided specific interventions in the area of reading where he or she is struggling. And again, the path for evaluating for dyslexia is through IDEA or special education. Parents should not be asked to consent to an evaluation to identify dyslexia through Section 504 instead of through IDEA. We will talk more about that on the next couple of slides. This is a slide that we shared with school districts in a recent presentation. We want to make sure that you, as parents and guardians, also understand what it means for schools to seek parental consent. First of all, the school must make sure that parents are informed about what it is they are being asked to consent to. You must be given all the information related to the action the school is proposing to take, in this case, conducting an evaluation. You should be notified in your native language or other mode of communication. You must understand and agree in writing to the evaluation. The evaluation is described, and you understand that consent is voluntary and can be withdrawn at any time. Part of how the school makes sure you are informed about what you are being asked to consent to is by giving what is called prior written notice, PWN. The PWN must include, among other things, a statement of the parent rights, whom they should contact at the LEA or school district for information, and the steps the district proposes or refuses to take. Schools must also provide the notice of procedural safeguards, a notice containing a full explanation of the procedural safeguards or protections available under IDEA. Please ask questions and make sure you understand what the school is proposing to do and how the evaluation process will work. So looking at the key takeaway on the slide, it's critical that parents and guardians are informed of the procedural protections and rights afforded to them and their child under the IDEA. Going back to figure 3.8 chart and starting at the top of the slide, we are picking up from the question, does the parent give consent for an FIE? Let's start with the yes box on the right, first labeled E. If yes, then you see in the box that the school will conduct the FIE. As a reminder, there is a 45 school day timeline for that FIE, except in some specific situations. That FIE provides the information to answer the question, does the student have an IDEA eligible condition such as dyslexia or a related disorder? But what if the parent refused to consent to the FIE? That moves you into the no box on the left labeled D. In that situation, the school should seek parental consent for a Section 504 evaluation. Then the question is, does the parent give consent for the Section 504 evaluation? I know this might be confusing to now see an option for a 504 evaluation after we have stressed several times that evaluations for dyslexia go through the IDEA process. The state board chose to include an option to allow dyslexia to potentially still be identified through 504 for situations where parents or guardians refuse to consent to an evaluation under IDEA, but are willing to consent under Section 504. Parents can only be offered this evaluation process if they are unwilling to consent to a full evaluation under IDEA. Parents could also refuse consent under 504. We feel that if parents are properly informed about an evaluation under IDEA, they will have very few parents refuse that option. Here is another slide we have used with school districts training to make sure that they are working to inform parents about what an evaluation under IDEA is. We wanted to share this slide with families so that you understand what the school is expected to do when attempting to get consent from parents to conduct the evaluation. Schools may not in any way persuade or encourage parents and guardians to refuse giving consent to conduct an evaluation under IDEA. Schools should work to explain to parents that consenting to an evaluation under IDEA is not the same as consenting to special education services. Explain that special education services can never be provided without their consent, even if they consent to conducting the IDEA evaluation. Schools should make sure parents and guardians understand that after the IDEA evaluation is complete, they will be part of the team that makes the determination about eligibility and services. Schools should help parents and guardians understand that FIE is an opportunity to gather all of the information and data about their child so that they can participate with the rest of the ARD committee in making informed decisions. If the parent does not give consent for evaluation under IDEA, dyslexia may be identified through Section 504 in situations where parents or guardians refuse consent to an evaluation under IDEA, box D on the flowchart. Some of you may be wondering what the difference is between dyslexia evaluations under IDEA versus Section 504. Why is it so important that parents fully understand the rights they would have with an evaluation under IDEA? Some of the main reasons are outlined on this slide, showing significant differences between evaluations under IDEA versus 504. They are not comparable equal evaluations, and we want you to understand that parents have more specific rights under IDEA, which is why TEA strongly encourages parents who are concerned that their child may have dyslexia agree to the evaluation under IDEA rather than refuse an IDEA evaluation and consent to a Section 504 evaluation. Let's talk through some of the differences. Under IDEA, a child is required to be assessed in all areas of suspected disability, and the evaluation has to be comprehensive enough to identify any special education or related service needs. This means the evaluation is going to consider things like assistive technology, behavioral attention needs, any social emotional concerns, language, even if the need for extended school year services. This is in addition to the key pieces that must be evaluated when considering dyslexia based on the handbook. In comparison, a Section 504 evaluation is a much more narrow look, specific to only those components required by the handbook to be looked at for dyslexia. There may be other contributing issues or needs that are not identified through the 504 evaluation. Next, timelines. As we have mentioned, there is a 45 school day timeline for evaluations under IDEA. With Section 504, there is no specific timeline in the regulations. Regarding the committee or group of people who review the evaluations and make decisions, with IDEA, there are specific members for an admission, review, and dismissal ARD committee who are required. Parents are one of those required members. With 504, parents are not required members. Under IDEA, if you disagree with the evaluation, you could request an independent evaluation at no cost to you. Under 504, this option does not exist. And one more thing to make sure you understand, consenting to an evaluation under IDEA does not mean you consent to special education services. Even if the ARD committee recommends special education, as the parent, you always maintain the right to refuse those services. Parents have to consent to services before they can begin. Going back to the flow chart, if we look at figure 3.8, this slide picks up at the top from the situations shown on the last slide. Let's start up at the top on the left side in box D. As a reminder, the only way to get to box D is if the parent first refuses consent to the evaluation under IDEA. Only then can the school seek consent under Section 504. If the parent refuses consent to the 504 evaluation, then the LEA would move to the no box in the middle of the slide and continue providing core instruction and any other appropriate tiered interventions. If, however, the parent consents to the 504 evaluation, then you would move to box F, where an evaluation is conducted under Section 504, and the 504 committee then answers the question if the dyslexia or related disorder substantially limits one or more of life's major activities. Now let's look at box E in the top right corner. The student has been evaluated under IDEA, and the question is, does the student have an IDEA eligible condition, such as dyslexia or a related disorder? If the answer is no, then you move into the no box in the middle, where the student continues core instruction and any appropriate tiered interventions. If the answer is yes, we move to box G. If the student has an IDEA eligible condition, such as dyslexia or a related disorder, then the ARD committee determines if a need for special education services exists. The next question is, does the student require special education because of the identified IDEA eligible condition? Let's look at some key takeaways from this section of the flowchart. If the student has an IDEA eligible condition, such as dyslexia or a related disorder, then the ARD committee determines if a need for special education services exists. Remember, you are a required member of the ARD committee and part of making the decision. On the flowchart, boxes E and G represent the two components or prongs of IDEA eligibility: the presence of the disability condition and the need for specially designed instruction. A school can only seek consent for an evaluation under Section 504 if the parent refuses consent for an evaluation under IDEA. Here again, I have the questions we left off with at the top of the slide. Starting from the top right box with the letter G with the question, does the student require special education because of the identified IDEA eligible condition? Remember here, the ARD committee is talking about the second piece or prong for special education eligibility and need for special education. If the ARD committee answers yes, then the student would be identified as a student who is eligible for special education and an IEP would be developed. If the ARD committee determines that despite having an IDEA eligible condition, in this case dyslexia, that the student does not require special education, then he or she would still be protected as an eligible student under Section 504, but not special education. Now let's move to the top left corner. If the Section 504 committee determines that the student's dyslexia or related disorder substantially limits one or more of life's major activities such as learning, reading, writing, or spelling, then you would move to box H. Yes, the student is eligible for Section 504. If the Section 504 committee determines that the student's dyslexia or related disorder does not substantially limit one or more of life's major activities, such as learning, reading, writing, or spelling, then you move to the box labeled no. The student continues grade level evidence-based core reading instruction, Tier 1, and provide any other appropriate tiered interventions. Let's look at some key takeaways from this section of the flowchart. The ARG committee determines if the student requires special education because of the disability. The ARG committee determines the types of services and supports the student needs. Parents or guardians are required members of the ARG committee. Standard protocol dyslexia instruction is considered for all students with dyslexia. We have heard that parents are sometimes told that if their child is eligible for special education, that they cannot receive whatever the standard dyslexia intervention that the school uses for children with dyslexia on the campus. This is not true. Students with an IEP have their dyslexia needs met in a variety of ways, including through accessing the standard protocol program that is used on the campus. That could be part of the student's services. This slide is a continuation of the previous slide if the school district refuses to evaluate your child. You as the parent have the right to initiate dispute resolution options, including mediation, state complaints, due process hearings. You have the right to request an independent educational evaluation, IEE, at public expense. If you believe your child is eligible for Section 504 aids, accommodations, and services, you have the right to request an evaluation under Section 504. Also, the handbook now also contains a link to the TEA's dispute resolution page. Also in Chapter 3, under this section titled Formal Evaluation, there was a new sentence added which states, as part of the evaluation, when dyslexia is suspected, in addition to the parent and team of qualified professionals required under IDEA, it is recommended that the multidisciplinary evaluation team include members who have specific knowledge regarding the reading process, dyslexia-related disorders, and dyslexia instruction. This additional sentence speaks to the recommendation that multidisciplinary teams, including those dyslexia service providers that may have a lot of experience in evaluating for dyslexia, as well as with intervention, they can be a significant contributor to the evaluation team. As a parent or guardian, please ask about who all is involved in providing input as part of the evaluation. Those are the main updates to Chapter 3. The domains or areas to assess for dyslexia remain the same with minimal language changes. Chapter 4, Critical Evidence-Based Components of Dyslexia Instruction. This chapter overall has relatively few changes. The critical evidence-based components of dyslexia instruction have not changed. However, there is some updated language in a few sections that I will point out. Again, this is not new, but I wanted to share the components that must be part of a dyslexia program that school districts purchase or develop to use with students with dyslexia. Here we have the names of the components from the handout, from the handbook, as well as a quick definition in parentheses. The term evidence-based is used throughout the handbook. When talking about reading, if something is evidence-based, it means that there is reliable, trustworthy, and valid evidence or proof that when a specific instructional strategy, program, or intervention is used with a group of students, that the students can be expected to make adequate gains in reading achievement. In other words, something that is evidence-based is known to be generally effective for most students. If something is not evidence-based, it means that there is not data or research to support that it is effective. For example, a student cannot simply access an independent computer program as their dyslexia instruction because independent computer interventions for dyslexia are not evidence-based. Dyslexia instructional approaches must be simultaneous, multisensory, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile instruction, where all learning pathways to the brain are presented simultaneously in order to enhance memory and learning. Systematic and cumulative instruction involves the presentation of skills from easiest to most difficult. Each skill is predictive on mastery of previously introduced skills. Explicit instruction is explained and demonstrated by the teacher, one language and print concept at a time. Explicitly involves direct instruction where the teacher demonstrates a task and provides guided practice before the student attempts the task independently. Diagnostic teaching to automaticity means that a skill is taught to the level of automatic recall or access. In other words, the skill can be performed quickly in an effective manner. Synthetic instruction refers to the presentation of parts of the language and how the parts come together and form a whole. Analytic instruction refers to presentation of the whole and then how it can be broken down into the component parts. The 2018 Dyslexia Handbook already contained information about standard protocol dyslexia instruction and specially designed instruction. The text that you see underlined on the slide is added text that appears in the 2021 update under the heading Specially Designed Instruction. Note that participation in standard protocol dyslexia instruction must be considered for all students, including those receiving dyslexia instruction under IDEA. Standard protocol dyslexia instruction could be part of the specially designed instruction and services provided to meet the student's needs. A student with an IEP can access any intervention program or service available on the campus. They don't have access to less, but rather access to more. Standard protocol dyslexia instruction is part of the continuum of services that may be appropriate to meet a student's needs in the IEP. So if your school says that a student with an IEP cannot access whatever their typical dyslexia intervention program on the campus is, that is simply not true. It is up to the ARD committee to determine what programs, supports, and services will meet the student's needs. Chapter 4 of the handbook contains information about providers of dyslexia instruction. School districts should have highly trained educators provide dyslexia instruction. Dyslexia teachers must have specific training on the critical components of dyslexia instruction and the program they use. Dyslexia teachers must deliver the instruction in the way it is intended to be taught. Dyslexia teachers do not have to hold a specific license or certification. A dyslexia teacher does not have to be certified as a special educator when serving a student who receives special education. Students receiving special education should be provided dyslexia services by the best person to provide the instruction. Chapter 5, Dysgraphia. Like Chapter 2, this chapter of the Dyslexia Handbook first appeared in 2018. Throughout Chapter 5, one of the main changes was the clarification that the process for identifying dysgraphia will follow child-find procedures for conducting a full individual initial evaluation, FIE, under the IDEA, just like an evaluation for dyslexia. These procedural processes require coordination among the teacher, campus, administrators, diagnostician, and other professionals as appropriate when factors such as a student's English language acquisition, previously identified disability, or other special needs as present. In the next couple of slides, I will cover some tips for families. Where can a parent go for help? At the very beginning of this presentation, they talked about SPEDTex. I skipped a slide there. Sorry, I jumped ahead. All right, how does a parent request an evaluation under IDEA? If you suspect your child has dyslexia or any other learning disability, send a written request for a special education evaluation to the principal or special education director. Clearly state that you want a full individual evaluation under the IDEA. Explain your specific concerns, such as a lack of reading progress and suspicion of dyslexia. Okay, here's the right slide. Sorry about that. Where can a parent go for help? At the beginning of this presentation, you all had gotten information about SPEDTex. So parents, please go to SPEDTex. Also at SPEDTex, you have access to the Parent's Guide to the Admission, Review, and Dismissal Process and the Notice of Procedural Safeguards. You can find those documents and they are downloadable. Once you have gone through the whole identification process and your child is receiving dyslexia instruction, the next step is the monitoring progress. Hopefully, your child's reading will begin to improve quickly. Monitoring reading progress is the next step. You should get progress reports and information about your child's reading regularly. Usually this will be as frequently as a report card or maybe even more frequent. Talk with the teachers and interventionists working with your child. Ask them questions about progress and the data they are collecting. At home, keep notes or even videos of your child reading. It is very important to understand that all students may not respond well to any specific dyslexia intervention, even if it is evidence-based. An evidence-based program is not guaranteed to work for every individual child. If your child is not making progress, there needs to be adjustments. This could mean altering the time spent in the program, adding another piece to the program, or trying something else altogether. The key takeaway is that when students are not progressing, that changes need to be made. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope this presentation gave you a better idea of the changes that appear in the 2021 Dyslexia Handbook update. For more information or questions about special education in Texas, please contact SPEDTex. Thank you again from the Texas Education Agency.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Really appreciate all the information you gave us today. And I want to say a thank you to Deanna and to Dr. Porter for being rock stars in the chat box and trying to catch all those questions and answer those. We really appreciate that. So in the interest of time, we're not going to do any more question and answer so that we can move on to the Spanish portion of the webinar.
Stephanie, if it's all right, I think Deanna actually had a couple of clarifications. We can just take just a minute to do, if that's all right.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so a couple things that popped up through chat that I wanted to make sure we hit for the whole audience. One comment or question that came in was at the beginning, Michelle said the handbook is not posted in the register, so it's not in effect. It goes in effect 20 days after. That is true. At the same time, TEA has been working hard to get out information to LEAs that this is what they need to be doing right now. You need to be, if you're suspecting dyslexia, you need to be referring for an evaluation through IDEA. So we have put out what's called a to the administrator addressed letter, letting districts know the changes in the handbook and advising them to be acting on those changes. And we also did an LEA webinar a couple weeks ago, a webinar for school districts that used a lot of these same slides to tell them, this is what the new handbook says. So we are working really hard to get the word out to our schools as well. And so we encourage you guys as families to also, push for things at your school. If they're telling you, no, we don't do those evaluations through IDEA, they absolutely can, should, and need to do it that way. So just to clarify a little bit about, schools really can't say, well, it's not in effect yet. They have the information and we've put that information out there. And then there was another question that came in about certain certifications. And I know there was a slide on this, but just to make it, to hit it again, that there is a dyslexia therapist or a dyslexia teacher does not have to also have a special education certification in order to provide services to students with disabilities that have an IEP. So basically our guidance is the best person to provide intervention services to students with dyslexia should be the one to provide those services. And that's going to vary on a case-by-case basis for individual students, but there's no nothing that would keep an individual from being able to serve those students. And then
Just to build on that one,
Justin, go for it.
Sorry, just to build on that one a little bit, the school district cannot tell you that your student who is in special education cannot access something outside of special education. If they typically have a certain group of people providing a service outside of special ed, they can't tell you that your child can't access that. Your child certainly can access that. So just feel empowered as parents and advocates for your kiddos that if that's the case, understand that all things in general education, no matter where it's sitting or what it is, are available to students in special education as well. So we just hear occasionally that that school districts tell parents that if you want access to this licensed therapist, you have to get that through Section 504. You can't get it through IDEA, and that is just simply not true. Sorry, Deanna, I interrupted you, but go ahead.
No, I was actually about to say, Dr. Porter, if you want to add anything to that, go for it. So you were perfect. That was what I was going to say. I did find one other comment that came through though about questions about the evaluation team under IDEA and who's doing evaluations. There's a misconception that it's like a single individual. So the question was, does the DIAG, meaning an educational diagnostician, have to do the evaluation under IDEA? Evaluations under IDEA are done by a multidisciplinary team. So parents are part of the evaluation team. There is a professional who has specific training in evaluation there. So all that to say is it's not a single person who does an evaluation under IDEA. It's a team of people, and a reading specialist, reading teacher, reading interventionist absolutely can and should be part of that evaluation team. Multidisciplinary, what do they bring to the table? If there's suspicion that there may be speech and language, then a speech therapist is part of that team. Occupational therapist might be part of that team. So it's not a single individual who does an evaluation, it's a team of people. And I think that was it for us. So that does give us good time to get ready for the other.
Yeah, I think there's probably some other questions. PRN has let us know that they're gonna get us a transcript of the chat, and then we'll figure out whether we come back for another Q&A webinar and collect some other questions or whatever is the best way to get those answers to y'all. And obviously, if you have, we mentioned it in the slide deck, but you can go directly to SPEDTex for some of your questions as well, or you can email sped@tea.texas.gov, and we can help you there as well.
Thank you so much. Again, we really appreciate all the information, Michelle, Deanna, and Dr. Porter. So we're going to wrap up, conclude this webinar with a few additional things, and then we'll move over to our Spanish. So Gracie, I want to give you another opportunity to share about SPEDTex.
Just great to be a part of the webinar on today. And as Dr. Porter mentioned, should you have any questions, you are welcome to give us a call. Our contact information is on the screen. We do have bilingual consultants available as well. So please feel free to reach out to us should you have any questions, concerns about special education. SPEDTex is happy to help.
Thank you so much, Gracie. Just a reminder that a recording of the webinar today will be available on our website in the coming days. It takes us a couple of days to get that there. So if you will check back on our website at prntexas.org, we'll have that up and running. It is also on our Facebook page as well, and you can check it out there. And again, if you're needing a certificate of attendance, you can get that through an email that you will be receiving to thank you for attending today's webinar. You'll follow a link in that email and get your certificate of attendance. We do want to announce that we've got an upcoming webinar coming up in January. Partnered with SPEDTex, we are going to be showing, providing a webinar on the new complaints process and dispute resolution process. That's going to be on January 25th in English at 12:15 and Spanish at 1:15. And I want to thank you again for joining us. On the screen is the contact information for our Director of Statewide Services, Christina, our support specialist, Chelsea, and myself. Please be sure and check out our website at prntexas.org and like and follow us on Facebook at PRN Texas. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.